Today is Voluntary Thursdays. I wait for this day every week. Voluntary Thursdays is the name of a weekly event, happens on Thursdays, obviously, where local voluntarists from around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex meet, have dinner, have some of the best conversation I've ever had in my life. It's just a great event to be around good people. I woke up this morning to emails that my car sent me. My car emailed me to tell me that the tire pressure in my tires was low. Because apparently it's so cold now that the tire pressure in the tires has dropped to where my car has determined it needs to send me emails about it. So I think one of the days coming up soon, we're gonna have to go and have like a car maintenance day because it needs an oil change too, I think. For now though, I gotta get pastries for tonight when the family comes over. Everybody's staying the night tonight so we can wake up and have Christmas morning presents tomorrow. And then I gotta get home in time to pack up and head out to the meetup. Yes. Hey. What's up? Okay. So, you might recognize the rotting carcass from the previous episode. It is time to revive it because I unfortunately remembered that I have not an insignificant amount of Bitcoin cryptocurrency stored in a wallet on this machine. So suddenly it becomes much more sort of a priority to get it working again. Or at least get it awake long enough to pull it off easily. So since I built a new machine, I had started, sort of like salvaging this one, pulling parts out. So my first job is to get it reassembled and then try and turn it on and see if there's anything I can do, because it would be much easier to get my stuff off here if I can actually get it like functioning one more time. So I cleaned out the cooling system. Not that that's gonna like repair any damage that's already built up over time, but I just need it to run for a little while. While I do this, I thought it'd be fun to talk about the meetup tonight and the awesome conversation that we had there. So one of the subjects that came up tonight was the Don't Comply crew. Don't Comply is a group out of Texas that sort of advocate for various civil liberties, sometimes up to and including openly defying laws, as Texans are known to do from time to time. One thing they do every year is something they call Feed the Need. And what they do is they get a bunch of food and donations together, and they go out in wintertime and they feed the homeless people living in and around Dallas. So what does that have to do with not complying? Well, for some retarded reason, it's actually illegal to feed the homeless in Dallas. Apparently there's some licensing that you would have to get to be able to, I guess, prepare food for them or something. It makes no sense. So they openly defy the law to feed the homeless. And they do this once a year. And it's awesome. I'm not even getting like a light of any kind showing that it's alive. Oh, the power strip was turned off. That helps, right? Oh, no way. First try? No way. What? I need a monitor plugged in. There's this one angry red blinking light on the motherboard that I'm hoping if I ignore long enough it'll just go away and start working. It's just not looking good, guys. I think if I'm going to bring this thing back from the dead, it's going to require more time than I can afford right now. Alright, well, rest in peace. But anyway, we were talking about Don't Comply, breaking the law to help people. The question came up like, well, why is it... Forget the law. The law is the most uninteresting thing in the world. The law is just merely like opinions of politicians enforced at the gunpoint of the police. Just because something is law does not make it good or bad or evil or proper or just, right? A law is just an opinion with guns, as they say. What is important is the sort of the ethics. What is right? What is right? What is wrong? The subject came up, is there anything wrong with being allowed to go and take food to homeless people on the street? Well, it always comes back to property rights. Every right that we have stems from property rights. Property right in our body, in ourself, in our actions, in the house that we own. If you drill down far enough, all rights are property rights. So to evaluate if something is right or wrong, we have to say, is anyone's property being damaged, and whose property is it happening on, right? So we're feeding the homeless people, obviously no property is being damaged. What property, whose property is this activity happening on? It's happening on something we all call public property. And I use air quotes because public property is not a legitimate form of property. And I know what I just said is contrary to everything you've basically grown up with in your world, but public property is not legitimate property. What do I mean by that? There are 3 ways a person can obtain ownership of property. Property could be land, it could be a car, it could be money. There are 3 ways to legitimately obtain ownership of property. Number 1, homestead. You can homestead the property. What is homesteading? Homesteading is how you acquire property that is already or previously unowned, meaning you're walking through a forest in the middle of nowhere, it's no one's property, but you want to make it yours. You homestead the property. For instance, you could put a fence up and build a house on it. That property now becomes yours. This is kind of what's known as the Lockean property rights system. Anyway, number 2, contract. You can obtain property by contract. What does that mean? It just means that you agreed with somebody to exchange property. You give me money, I give you ownership of this land that I own. That's contract. Number 3, tort. Tort simply means that I damaged you and therefore you have a legitimate claim to some of my property as restitution. So if I drive my car into the side of your house, you have a right to come at me for X amount of my property to cover the damages I did to your property. That's called tort. So who owns public property? People will say, the public. That's just a fuzzy way of saying everyone and no one. Some people will also say, the government owns the public property. It's a much longer discussion to have to explain why government is just a group of people working together that believe they have the rights to do things in an area. And for the purposes of property rights, a concept can't own something. A sentient being, a person, is the only thing that can own something. But let's pretend for a moment that this concept called government can actually own something. Has it acquired its public property legitimately? Did it acquire it through a tort? Did someone damage the government and had to hand over its property to the government? No. In fact, a lot of property was obtained through war, which is explicitly not on this list. Using force to acquire property is probably the most illegitimate means of acquiring property. So they didn't get it by tort. Did they get it by homesteading it? No. The government doesn't homestead anything. It incorporates, is the language used, property already owned by other people under its control. Did it gain it by contract? Except in rare cases where someone may have sold their property to the government doesn't obtain its property by contract. It might use terrible ideas like eminent domain, which is where they basically say, I'm taking your property and, here's some cash on the side to make you feel better about the theft. But in reality, the government doesn't acquire jack or shit through contract. It's all force. So if government doesn't actually own any property legitimately, if public property is not legitimate property, then we can't use that as a measuring stick to say that feeding homeless on public property can be stopped with any amount of force. Meaning you can't use force, you can't call the cops to come out and prevent someone from feeding the homeless on public property. Because it's basically unowned land. It's land that no one claims, that some people are sleeping on, and a group of people that do not legitimately own a piece of land cannot take guns to that land and tell other people what to do with it and call it good or okay. So that was just a tiny piece of the awesome discussion we had today at the meetup, and I wanted to share it with you guys. I had to blast through it so fast though. I'm sure I probably created more questions or objections or, oh, but what abouts in your head than I answered. So if you do have questions, please drop them in the comments. I am now going to try and harvest the hard drives out of this carcass to try and rescue my Bitcoins before they're lost to the digital afterlife. Wish me luck. Oh, no way. Is it broken? Oh. No. The waitress at the restaurant knocked the camera over. I had it sitting on a chair, and I guess she reached over and knocked it off the chair, and it crashed on the ground, and now it looks like the focus is broken.